Hello, and welcome to the Yarra Valley Living Centre and to another episode of Living Well. And today we have with us Mariette Buckle. Welcome, Mariette.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
So Mariette's going to speak to us about something that touches all of us at some point in our life, the whole area of grief. So thanks for your courage in taking up such a challenging subject for all of us. But I think we all need to get our hearts and our heads around this whole process that is one of the most difficult to face in our life. So I believe you have studied in grief counselling.
I did, yes. Some years ago, I did a postgraduate in child and adolescent grief counselling, and that was at a time when I was working in special education. I was working at a school for children with, special needs, intellectual disability, and a lot of the students there had, health impairments, physical disabilities. So it was during that time I took up the postgraduate course. But I've also had personal experience with grief and loss, which really led me to look at it more deeply for both myself, my own, for my own development, as well as for helping others, the people that I work with, at school. So
I understand that you chose to work in. You did your 1 year postgraduate course, and you used that in working with parents with children with disabilities.
Yeah. Well, at the school that I worked at, it's called a special developmental school. I remember one of the years that I worked was early intervention, with children who were around the age of 4, and parents would come on a Friday. Often with their children. We had support staff who would look after the children while the parents and I would do some activity together. And in those days, it was around 2004, scrapbooking was a big thing. And I remember one particular day, I had about 4 or 5 mums doing scrapbooking and had photos, of the kids. And it was a great informal opportunity to talk about how they were feeling, about their child. And many of them had health conditions such that, for example, cancer. One child had cancer, another one had spinal muscular atrophy. And it was actually her second child with that condition. And what they experience quite often is a recurring grief. They have expectations that this treatment for their child, they'll get better, they'll get well, and then that may not happen. So it's this ongoing, reoccurring grief as expectations and milestones aren't met, even without a health impairment. I was telling you earlier about a child that I had, a little girl with Down syndrome, and working to build up her muscles. They're quite hypertonic. They have low muscle tone. And this little girl wasn't able to stand unsupported. So this she's at the age of 4, still unable to walk and to stand independently. So before she could walk, and she's on her frame. And Mum and I were hoping by the end of the year she might take a step, but rather sadly, on the very last day of school, this sweet little girl puts her head down on the frame and just cries. And of course, Mum and I, it's heartbreaking. And I realise when I look back over the many students that I've had and watching the families, and their expectations, that this really is an ongoing, grief process when, significant events happen.
And it's very often the case that when we have a very big challenge in our life, that we're then able, through that challenge that we go through and what we learn, that when we're then able to help others. And I read something very beautiful. It said, wisdom comes to those who serve. And so it seems that sometimes we just deepen the carvings in our soul to be able to be of service to others. And I believe you had a very great tragedy.
I did. Also doing this postgraduate was some years, probably 7 years after my son died. My son was 22 years old when he committed suicide. And it was so unexpected and for us so out of character. So it was an absolutely devastating event. So it changed my life totally changed my life.
And this is what I heard you saying when we were talking about this, that this is what you were told, that your life will never be the same.
It was my brother who just made that passing comment to me. He said exactly that. He said, your life is forever changed. And that really stuck with me. And I was sharing with you how, after Dylan died, my daughter was 18, so 4 years younger, and she was planning on moving out anyway to live with a boyfriend. And I said, you go. And I knew that I had to do this on my own, this grief thing. So that's all it was at that stage, this enormous grief thing. So I was left alone to do just that. And surprisingly, I was able to function. I lived alone, so it was just me to cook, whatever that looked like, and just to make, the best of my life. But I also knew that I had to make some sense of it. And we'll call it the search for meaning. And that really what it was this search for meaning. And, I was telling you some of the books that I read, pick up the book, Tibetan book of, the new dying, and that I did read it, but I couldn't retain it. I couldn't understand it. And I read, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, got something out of that. And, so many other books. Some were easy reads and some were difficult reads. And I knew that I needed to, something I read was about going through it. I was saying to you, but yet I knew I had to go through it, not distract myself and not just be busy, which I was, but I knew I had to go through it, and that was going to be hard.
But when you say you were busy, did you go back to work?
No, I had taken a break from classroom teaching at that stage, and I was also doing some part-time classroom teaching and part-time tutoring. And I knew I couldn't face going back to work. I did not want to go back into a classroom. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't face people, and it's hard to explain, and it's hard for people to understand what it feels like when you've just lost the will to be what you were. And this is part of what I was saying of, this tremendous change. My life will never be the same, but I wasn't sure what it was going to be like. I honestly thought I would never go back into teaching. And I'm not really sure why, except I didn't want to face a staff room of families and people and those questions about, do you have any kids? Hard to understand.
And maybe people talking about their own children. So when they just talk, happy talk, oh, my son's just done this and then.
That's right. Yeah. So I just couldn't see myself doing that. So difficult. And this feeling of what will the change look like? What will I do? Who will I be? None of that I could figure out. I just couldn't figure it out. I could function well, so I could keep the house clean. It's just me. I could walk and do a bit of exercise, continue to read. I'd have the most incredible outbursts of crying. I'm glad I was alone because I am good, at the big cries, just breaking my heart, screaming the walls down. Just, it's incredible. What a difficult time. And then, I was saying it was 7 months later, my daughter was working in a new age shop, and she was at the front desk, the admin, checking the mail. And one day, a brochure comes on positive thinking, and with the Brahma Kumaris, and I'd never heard of them, but positive thinking, that sounds like a good place to start to find meaning. And it was a weekend retreat, and I wouldn't wear a name tag because I didn't want people talking to me. So I was still touchy about anyone getting to know me or what I was going through, not prepared to disclose it. So I wouldn't wear a name tag. People politely accepted that. But positive thinking, and then meditation. And I hadn't really considered meditation. And I thought, yeah, there's something about this that speaks to me. And I heard such wonderful, phrases, hard because it's 20-something years later that I heard a phrase like unconditional love, and I'd never even given that much thought. And I knew that was worth unpacking. And, so meditation was going to look at, for me, it was going to look at, a more positive outlook. I was, looking to be calm, looking to be peaceful, and I was looking for connection. At that stage, I wasn't religious, brought up Catholic. So, I had a notion of God, a belief in God, but not a relationship with God. And I thought, with positive thinking, meditation, there was the promise of that relationship.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me on another occasion that, you were going to the meditation center, you were learning, I think not the first retreat, 2 or 3 retreats.
Yeah.
And I think because in the world, people are so kind of touchy about this subject of God, that the word wasn't mentioned.
That's right.
After 2 or 3 retreats of going to our retreat center in Frankston. And what were you feeling?
Well, I thought after a couple of retreats and people being careful not to mention God, I like to hear about, your higher self. I actually at the dinner table leaned over to this lovely, lovely dear woman who I did not know was the coordinator, and that's Sally, of course. And I just said to her, "Do you believe in God?" And she gave me that very wonderful, matronly smile and said, "Yes." Yeah. So I thought, now I can, I can speak more openly to people there.
Yeah, that's an interesting message for us, because we are careful not to push it onto others, and yet so many people actually do want it.
Yes, very much so. And that was, that really meant so much to me. So I was able to explore that, and that getting to know God personally.
Did that help in the healing?
Very much. It did help. Look, it was, this is progress. This is progress. But I felt that I was becoming a student, that I was on the right path to learning more about myself, and to knowing that is going to involve some connection with, with a higher power. So I thought, yep, I'm going to step into this. And, I was saying to you too about I was not vegetarian then. I'd never been drinking or smoking. So not doing that was, well, I never did that anyway. Isn't that surprising for a baby boomer? But no, I didn't. But talking about meditation will be better if, you're free from garlic and onions and meat. And I thought, it's meditation that I want. So I thought, and I learned vegetarian cooking because they have cookbooks, and I'm eating the food and people are helping me. So that was a wonderful support.
So all of that helped.
It did help. This was helping. This was all helping. But really, it's not an easy process. Out of all the losses, the loss of a child is really, it's not a contest in grief. My grief is bigger than your grief. It will never be that. But it really is regarded that the loss of a child is the big one. So it wasn't going to be easy. I knew I would have to do it myself. I knew I would have to go through it. That much I knew.
And going back to, that the time that it happened. So you said that it was a suicide. That must be one of the hardest things for a parent to accept.
Devastating.
Did you feel loved by your son?
Very much so, very much so. And the great comfort, it was a great comfort, is even, his friends said they were there, with me and my family, and my former husband was incredibly supportive, although we'd been divorced and remarried, incredibly supportive. And they're all saying, Dylan did love you so much. And I'm left with the big question, the big suffering question, which is why.
And why would he do this when he loves you so much?
That's right.
Is that the question?
Right. Exactly.
So?
And the answer really, and I have to be brutally honest, and I was comfortable to share with you, Morny, that the answer was back in 97, it was suicide, depression, mental health issues were not spoken about. I am so glad that they are now, that we speak so freely, and there's so much work being done in schools and society in general, talking about your mental health and certainly self-harm and suicide. But in 1997, neither me or my former husband would ever say to each other, I think Dylan might be depressed. Never came up. He was a top student, high achiever, very social.
So you would, even in these days, you probably wouldn't have picked it.
No.
So the question I think that a lot of people would have is, what could I have done? Is there anything you could have done, do you think?
I don't think, look, at that time, I really don't think there was anything I could have done. I don't think I could have done anything differently. I regret not identifying depression. I regret not knowing about it, but that's the way it was. And no one in my family, none of us would have gone down that route. I look back now and there were some small signs that, that he was struggling with what we'd call mental health issues.
Which were?
Well, there were times when he would say to me, that he wasn't feeling well about relationships with his mates, that he, there were small indications that he was concerned about relationships, very overly concerned, anxious, in fact, about relationships. But even that wasn't enough of a red flag.
Yeah, because it's kind of normal. Isn't it? For how old was he?
22.
So it's a pretty normal concern to have.
That's right, yeah.
And you used to speak openly with each other. You were good friends.
Very, very open with each other. So while I take all that, the relationship that we had as, as mother and son, the openness, and I take that as, very wonderful, very precious. And, the losses felt very deeply. And what's important to me is that people that I speak with now are, how can I help them to support, their kids and their mental health? And there are so many resources now that you can access through schools as well as through council programs.
And yet still it's too prevalent.
It is too prevalent.
It's not coming down, the suicide rate.
It's not. It's not. It is a difficult thing. And, once a parent, is bereaved, it's what happens next? What's the impact of that? What happens then to that mother, father, and the family, the support? And we were talking about that. So apart from, 7 months later, I'm, down at the Frankston Centre gaining benefit from the retreats and the meditation, my personal development. I'm also, still finding it very difficult. The missing of my son was huge. And it was actually 5 years after he passed away, I thought, this isn't ending for me, Some things are happening, but some things are not. And that's when I was telling you that I knew about the Compassionate Friends, which is a support group. It's called the Mutual Self-Help Support Group for parents, grandparents and siblings who have lost a child or a grandchild. And I contacted them.
After 5 years?
After 5 years.
Why do you think you didn't reach out to a group like that earlier? Did you not know about such groups?
I did.
You weren't ready?
I wasn't ready. It's hard to put in words. It's a timely reminder that we're all different. That's the first thing. Everybody's grief is different. I'm an expert at grief, my grief. I'm not an expert in anyone else's. I have things to offer. I can engage in a dialogue, but I'm not an expert in anyone else's grief.
And if I was your colleague, like I was working with you or your friend, what could I have done in those first few days?
Yeah.
What would you advise? Because often we stay away because we think they probably don't want to talk about it. I don't know if I'm close enough. We kind of leave it to the immediate family, and yet perhaps they're not the ones that can help at that time because they're also grieving.
Exactly.
What could a friend or a colleague do?
Exactly. Our family, wonderful, our greatest resource is the family and friends. And I am so, so fortunate that I have a good family, but as you just said before, they're close to it. They've lost a grandson, a nephew, and also I don't want them to see my grief laid bare and watch me suffering
and worry about
me. So this is the difficulty.
So you put on your brave face.
I put on my brave face. And that is really why I ended up at Compassionate Friends. But getting back to your question, so when someone comes back to work and they've suffered, a loss and they're experiencing the effects of that, the grief, I think it's really important to just ask their permission to say, I'm glad you're back. If you want to chat, I'd like to. I'm available. And ask their permission, if they say, sure, I'll catch you up in the tea room, and then say, do you mind if I ask you about, the person you've lost? And if you ask their permission, you can bet they'll say, no, I don't mind. Thank you for asking. But I think that's the best thing you could say. Do you mind if I ask you about, your son, your daughter, even, a parent that you've lost?
And that was 5 years later that you actually managed to get back to work. What about in the initial days, like the first few days? Should we reach out to people? And I mean, if I was your good friend or colleague, not really, really good friend, see, if it's a really good friend, you can, but if it's like just maybe one or two removed, you might hesitate. And then what is the best way I can reach out?
The best way is really the practical things, like to say, would you like me to cook you a casserole? Would you like me to help you with your water? Have you done your vacuuming?
Wow.
These sorts of the really practical things. That has two benefits. One is we've got to cook every day, 1 or 2 meals. And you're in such a brain fog, and it's foreign. It's foreign. You may be functioning, getting up, a spoonful of, porridge in the mouth and a bit of a walk, and, it can function, but to keep going.
Not comforting food even. You just eat what you can just live on, just to keep yourself alive. So that casserole, that home cooked meal.
Absolutely.
The love. And then also you don't have to talk about anything.
That's right.
If you come in, vacuum, then you can ask, do you want to have a chat? And then it's up to you to say yes or no, and out the door. Out the door.
That sounds wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And also, and you said something really important, and it is a connection. Someone could come in and say, oh, yes, that would be great, to vacuum, or can you please hang up the washing? I'd love that so much. I'll make us a cup of tea.
So you feel like you're being held.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So we often say, if there's anything I can do, let me know. But I would like people to offer. So would you like me to make a casserole? Can I bring you around? You're shopping.
Because we're not good at asking.
No. No, we're
No,
not.
I'm fine. You know, that's what we often say.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I'm practical.
I want to come and vacuum for you. Can I do that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I want to come and mow your lawn.
Yep. You've got it.
Okay.
That's absolutely wonderful. You know, it is, the grief, you know, and saying about the, you know, the brain fog, it really is something difficult to explain, you know. It's very difficult to explain. And in a way, you don't want to talk about it with others. You know, you don't want to be seen either as incapacitated. You know, I don't want to be seen as someone they need to worry about. And a lot of people feel that way, you know.
And how did your daughter cope? Because there was just two children, 4 years apart. He was big brother.
That's right.
How did she cope with it? And how did you cope together?
Yeah, she was 18 at the time and planning anyway to move out and live with a boyfriend. So I said to her, you go. It wasn't far away from where I lived, so it's still accessible. But I said, you follow through and you plan. And although I missed her terribly, I knew she was planning that anyway. And it did give me a chance to, you know, to be on my own, because I didn't know what my life was going to look like. And I knew that, although at 18 you don't say you're caring for her, but it is care. She's under the roof, so, you know, there is the care. And I wasn't sure I could totally provide that. But, you know, we've always been very close, and she was quite amazing. You know, I was saying there were times we were in the car and she was driving and a song comes on the radio and she says, Mum, do you want that one? Just knowing, you know, it's a sad song, and you know, she'll turn it off, change the station, and I'll say, no, you can leave it. Thanks for asking. So she was tuned in, and
also just knowing that she was probably in love, so she was a bit buffered, and she's away, and you know, so it gave you the opportunity not to have to help her process, so you could do your own work. So it was actually a bit of a gift.
It was. Look, in one way, it absolutely was. We're still in touch, but it was because I had to really look after myself, and you know, my emotional, my spiritual well-being. They'd taken such a beating. And that I knew, as I say, I had to go through it. I just have to go through it. So I knew, you know, I was saying to you two things. One is I knew I had to go through it. I didn't know how long it was going to take. And the other thing was that comment about change, that my life was changed forever. And
you were changing.
And I was changing, me personally.
Yeah. You're not the same person as you were.
No.
Yeah.
No. You know, I was referencing with you about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She's well known for her stages of grief. And just saying that, you know, she put that together when she was working in palliative care with people who were dying, not people who were grieving, but people themselves dying. And we know the stages of, you know, denial and anger in that context. But let's just go to the final one where she says acceptance. And to really understand that acceptance, so in palliative care, it's acceptance of your mortality, of your own death. But for those of us who are grieving, what does that mean? Acceptance of what? It's acceptance of how your life is going to be. So accepting this different life, you know, because even though your children become adults and, you know, they move away with their own families and own lives, they're always your children. They're always your children. You always have expectations.
You always remember their birthdays.
You do. So the acceptance is a huge thing. And, you know, my daughter has been incredible. She's now married, has 2 children of her own. And I know she feels very deeply, you know, the loss of her brother, especially the big events. When the big family gets together and she sees her cousins, boy-girl cousins, they're together with their families, their kids, and she's missing not having her brother and his wife and his kids who would be cousins to her children.
So there's a continual loss in that sense.
It is a continual loss. It is, and it never goes away. And you know, when she rings me on his birthday, I might say something like, oh, I'm glad you remembered it's Dylan's birthday. Not just coincidentally, you phoned anyway.
Yeah.
You know, and she goes, no, I won't forget. And, you know, she won't. So, yeah, it's wonderful that we have got that relationship. It's absolutely wonderful. I mean, my heart breaks for her not having him.
So 5 years.
Yeah.
Do you think there are things that you could have done to process it more quickly, or is that even a wrong question?
You ask any question. It was the way it was for me. You know, if I'll say something absolutely out there, but it's absolutely true. I honestly felt that I didn't want to go to a support group because they're all bereaved parents. They, you know, but nobody will miss their son as much as I've missed mine. And that's how it felt. That's how it felt. So that's pretty out there, but that is how I felt. You know, I don't want to go, you know, to other people, but, you know, talk about it. But when I did, it really was amazing. They have a house, you know, a lovely house, and the people there were so wonderful, so lovely. And I've said before, I worked in disabilities, and the people I immediately became close to had lost children through illness. And there was one on the one in what became there were probably four of us who were very close. She'd lost her son to suicide, and the other two ladies had lost their daughters to illness. So one was muscular dystrophy, and the other one was actually epilepsy, what's called SUDEPs, which is sudden death from epilepsy. And she was an adult woman and hadn't continued with her medication for epilepsy because she was hoping to become pregnant. But yeah, and things grew from there. I became very involved with them as a volunteer. So happy to do that. They were such lovely people, and they did understand. They understand incredibly well. And it is a volunteer, it's mutual self-help. And that also gave me such an understanding of the benefit, the service of volunteering. You know, I was on the magazine committee, so, you know, writing the magazine with another lovely lady and a group of us who would look over what I'd chosen as articles for the magazine. The articles come from bereaved parents who send in things. And I was on the committee, on the board, and I was also a phone counsellor. So there was training for that. So I did the training for phone counselling, and that was a lady who had lost her brother, but the lady was also a psychologist. So she gave us so service, what a benefit service is. What a benefit.
Wow.
You know.
So thank you so much for being so open and sharing so clearly so that we can help ourselves and also help others.
Thank you so much.
Would you be able to just share a few thoughts to close the session, just like a little meditation? Just let's sit for a few minutes and
just a few thoughts. When I sit quietly, I think firstly of the love in my heart. And it is now the most unconditional love, not just for myself and for the courage and strength that I have shown. The love in my heart is for everyone. We all suffer in so many different ways, yet we can all reach out and connect in some way, however small, and that's benefit to everyone.
Let's just sit with that thought for a minute. Sending good wishes now to all who need it at this very moment, who are struggling with acceptance, with grief. I'm sure this has been very helpful because not only do we go through it ourselves, but we all know people, friends and relatives who are going through this process. So thank you so much, Mariette.
Thank you.
Been really, really helpful.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mary.